On a rainy night in Manchester, an elegant woman seeks out a private detective to investigate her husband. What appears to be a simple case of infidelity transforms into a deadly game of international intrigue where nothing and no one is exactly what they seem to be. Get ready for a story where each revelation is more shocking than the last. The rain was lashing against the office windows when Victoria Henderson entered, bringing with her an aura of mystery that immediately caught Marcus Blackwood's attention. The private investigator observed her blue eyes, scanning the modest environment with an interest that seemed too genuine. "Mr. Blackwood," her voice was soft but firm, "thank you for receiving me with such short notice." Marcus gestured to the chair in front of him, studying the details. The impeccable appearance, the wedding ring she unconsciously twisted on her finger. "Discretion is part of my job, Mrs. Henderson," he replied, noticing how she slightly shuddered at hearing her surname. "But I confess I was intrigued by your urgent request." Victoria adjusted herself in the chair, with her elegant posture. "My husband is cheating on me," she declared, straightforwardly. The frankness of the statement contrasted with the almost imperceptible tremor in her voice. Marcus leaned forward, his green eyes meeting hers. After years in the profession, he had learned to read people. Victoria Henderson was a carefully edited book. Every word, every gesture seemed rehearsed. But there was something more, something between the lines that intrigued him. "What makes you so sure of this?" he asked, observing her reaction. "Woman's intuition?" She tried to smile, but the gesture didn't reach her eyes. "Richard has changed in recent months. Late-night calls, sudden business trips, new passwords on his phone." She paused, taking a deep breath. "But it's not just that. It's as if he were preparing for something." Marcus picked up his notepad, more out of habit than necessity. "Preparing? To leave me, perhaps," she answered, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "There are strange movements in our joint accounts, documents being organized." And then she opened her purse, pulling out an envelope. "I found this." The envelope contained photos of Richard Henderson in different locations around the city, always accompanied by a dark-haired woman. The photos were grainy, taken from a distance. "Did you follow him?" Marcus asked, analyzing the images. "No," Victoria answered quickly, perhaps too quickly. "These photos were sent to me, anonymously." Marcus raised an eyebrow. In his experience, anonymous photos were rarely a good sign. "And why seek me out?" "I need someone who doesn't have connections to my husband's social circle. Someone who can work in the shadows." Marcus leaned back in his chair, watching the rain through the window for a moment. There was something in this story that didn't fit perfectly, like a dissonant note in a familiar melody. But that wasn't what bothered him. It was the fact that, even while noticing the warning signs, he felt inexplicably drawn to the case. "My daily rate is—" "Money is not an issue," she interrupted him, opening her purse again and placing a thick envelope on the desk. "Consider this in advance." Marcus didn't need to open the envelope to know that the amount was substantially higher than his normal rate. "Mrs. Henderson," he began, choosing his words carefully, "I need you to understand something. If I accept this case, I will follow the evidence wherever it leads. No exceptions." Victoria held his gaze for a long moment before responding. "That's exactly what I expect, Mr. Blackwood." As he watched her leave the office, Marcus felt the familiar weight of responsibility. And something else, something he couldn't name yet. The following morning brought a rare sunny day in Manchester, but Marcus barely noticed as he studied his computer screen. Richard Henderson smiled at him through dozens of photos from social events and business articles. President of Henderson Real Estate Development, occasional philanthropist, member of half a dozen exclusive clubs. His public life was an open book of business success. "Too late to give up the case?" asked Sarah, his secretary and only employee, placing a cup of coffee on his desk. Marcus frowned, his eyes fixed on a particular photo. Richard Henderson shaking hands with the mayor during the inauguration of a residential complex. There was something about the businessman's smile that bothered him. Too white, too perfect, like a well-fitted mask. "Since when do I give up on anything, Sarah?" "Never." "That's why you always end up in trouble," she replied, leaning in to look at the screen. "But there's something different about this case, isn't there?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, twisting the ring he no longer wore on his finger. Sarah was right. There was something different. The information he'd managed to gather in the last 24 hours was perfectly normal, and that's exactly what disturbed him. "I'm going to do some field work," he announced, standing up and grabbing his coat. The first destination was obvious. The Riverside Gardens residential complex, Henderson's most recent and ambitious project. The place was impressive. 3 glass and steel towers rising along the riverbank, reflecting the sky like giant mirrors. But Marcus didn't head for the buildings, instead going to the small cafe across the street. "Breakfast is on me," he said, sitting down across from a middle-aged man checking his phone. In exchange for some information, Jack Lewis, former colleague from Scotland Yard days, now worked as the complex's head of security. "Thought you'd left the police behind, Marcus." "Old habits," Marcus shrugged. "What can you tell me about Richard Henderson?" Jack looked around before leaning forward. Officially, an exemplary boss. Unofficially, he made a significant pause. "Something strange is happening. Meetings outside business hours. Visitors who don't go through reception. Files being transferred in the middle of the night." "What kind of files?" "Don't know, but the IT people are nervous. Last week, Henderson brought in an external team to do a system upgrade. After that, part of the servers became restricted even to me." Marcus absorbed the information, remembering Victoria's words about strange movements. "And what about the nighttime visitors?" "Mainly one woman," Jack replied, showing a photo on his phone. "Brunette, always well-dressed. Arrives late, leaves early. The same woman from the photos Victoria had shown." But there was something more in Jack's expression. "What aren't you telling me?" Jack sighed. "Last night, there was an argument. Henderson and the woman. She left furious, shouting something about him not being able to do this to her, that he'd gone too far." Marcus felt a shiver down his neck. "Did you hear anything else?" "Just one phrase. She said, 'If you think you can discard me like this, you don't know me.'" Marcus's phone vibrated. A message from Victoria. "We need to talk. It's urgent." He stood up, leaving enough money for several coffees on the table. "Thanks, Jack. If you notice anything else, I'll let you know," Jack completed. "But Marcus, be careful. There are powerful people involved in this." On his way to meet Victoria, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was only scratching the surface of something much bigger. The pieces were starting to fit together, but they formed an increasingly disturbing picture. His phone vibrated again. Another message from Victoria. "I found something that will change everything. Come to the Midland Hotel. Room 512. Marcus looked at the message for a long moment. In his years as a detective, he had learned that dramatic revelations rarely brought good news. Even so, he quickened his pace toward the hotel, not noticing that he was being watched by a familiar figure from across the street. The Midland Hotel maintained its Victorian elegance, even under the dim evening light. Marcus climbed to the 5th floor using the stairs, a habit from his police days that he'd never abandoned. The corridor was silent, too silent for his taste. Something was wrong. The door to room 512 was ajar. Marcus felt his muscles tense, years of training instantly returning. He pushed the door slowly, his eyes adapting to the room's dimness. "Victoria?" he called, his voice low and controlled. No response. The room was a mess. Open drawers, scattered papers, a broken wine glass on the carpet. And then, through the billowing curtains of the balcony, he saw it. Richard Henderson was lying on the floor, a dark stain spreading beneath his body. Beside him, Victoria Henderson was kneeling, her hands trembling over her husband's body. "I found him like this," she whispered, her face pale as marble. "Marcus, I swear." He acted quickly, pulling her away from the body. "Don't touch anything else," he ordered, already reaching for his phone. But before he could dial, he heard sirens approaching. "Someone already called the police," Victoria said, her voice strangely distant. The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Police officers invaded the room, followed by Homicide Division investigators. Marcus immediately recognized the chief detective, Ian Foster, his former partner. "Blackwood," Foster greeted dryly, before turning to Victoria. "Mrs. Henderson, I need you to come with me." Marcus watched as Victoria was taken for questioning, her posture still impeccable despite the circumstances. That's when he noticed something under the table, a small USB drive, partially hidden by the carpet. With a discreet movement, he picked it up, sliding it into his pocket. If his suspicions were correct, that small object might contain the answers he was looking for. "What are you doing here, Marcus?" Foster asked, approaching. "Work," he replied simply. "For the widow?" Foster raised an eyebrow. "Interesting timing. She hired me yesterday, suspected her husband was having an affair, and now he's dead." Foster made a significant pause. "Convenient, isn't it?" Marcus studied the scene once more. The position of the body, the angle of the fall, the knocked-over objects. Something didn't fit. "This wasn't a crime of passion, Ian," he said quietly. "It was executed. Professional." Foster stared at him for a long moment. "Stay out of this, Marcus. You're not on the force anymore." But Marcus barely heard him. His eyes had caught something on the bedside table, a partially burned photograph. In it, Richard Henderson appeared alongside the dark-haired woman from the other photos. But there was a third person in the image, someone who had been deliberately removed. "Mrs. Henderson is being taken to the station," an officer informed. "We found gunpowder residue on her hands." Marcus felt his stomach sink. The evidence clearly pointed to Victoria, perhaps too clearly. His phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "She's not who you think she is." None of them are. Looking through the hotel window, Marcus saw Victoria being placed in the police car. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and he could swear he saw a flash of something. Fear? Guilt? Or something completely different? The USB drive weighed like lead in his pocket. Whatever Richard Henderson had been hiding, it had been important enough for someone to silence him permanently. The question was Victoria the killer or just another piece in a much bigger game? The sirens were fading in the distance, leaving only the sound of rain that was starting to fall again over Manchester. Marcus knew he had only a few hours before the police noticed that crucial evidence had disappeared from the crime scene. Hours to discover the truth or become the next target. The dim office of Marcus was engulfed in darkness when he finally inserted the USB drive into his computer. The rain continued falling outside, casting dancing shadows on the walls through the window. The device contained only one folder, named Contingency. Inside it, dozens of encrypted files and a single video. Marcus clicked on the video file, his heart slightly quickening. Old Wellington Pub in 20 minutes. The pub was practically empty when Marcus arrived. In a dark corner, a familiar figure was waiting, the dark-haired woman from the photographs. "My name is Rachel Warner," she said as soon as he sat down, "and you're investigating something much bigger than you imagine. Why don't you start by explaining your relationship with Richard Henderson?" Rachel smiled bitterly. "I was the external auditor for his company. I was hired to check some irregularities. At first, it seemed like ordinary money laundering. But then, she slid an envelope across the table. I found this." The photos showed Richard Henderson in Dubai 3 years earlier with a group of severe-looking men. "The man on the right is Thomas Chapman," Rachel explained. "Officially, a respectable businessman. Unofficially, influence peddling," Marcus completed. "I read about him in Scotland Yard files." "That's just the surface." Rachel lowered her voice. Henderson Real Estate was a front for something much bigger. Richard was planning to expose everything, but Marcus's phone vibrated. A message from Victoria. "Need to see you. I'm on London Road. I have to tell you the truth about Dubai." Rachel noticed his expression. "She contacted you, didn't she?" "Be careful, Marcus. Victoria isn't the innocent widow she appears to be. She was in Dubai, too." Before Marcus could respond, he noticed a red laser sight dancing on Rachel's shoulder. Without thinking, he knocked her to the floor as the sound of the shot shattered the pub's window. In the chaos that followed, Rachel disappeared, leaving only a card with a phone number and a scribbled word, quintessence. 20 minutes later, Marcus was standing on London Road, watching Victoria approach. She seemed different now, harder, more focused. "You saw Rachel," she said. "It wasn't a question. How did you—" "Because it was part of the plan," Victoria interrupted. "Marcus, I needed you to discover certain things on your own, so you would believe." "Believe what?" "That my husband wasn't the only person playing a double game." She looked around nervously. Richard wasn't the main target. He was just a means to get to Chapman. And now, a car passed slowly down the street, its lights reflecting something metallic in Victoria's bag. A gun. Now, she continued, her eyes meeting his with disturbing intensity. You need to choose a side, because their next move will be against you. Marcus completed. The piece is starting to fit together. The question is, what's your real role in all this, Victoria? An enigmatic smile played on her lips. Come with me and find out. Victoria's apartment was on the top floor of an Art Deco building in central Manchester. As the elevator ascended, Marcus noticed how perfectly calm she seemed for someone who had just been released on bail for suspected murder. Quintessence, he said, breaking the silence. What does it mean? It's the name of a project, Victoria replied, unlocking the apartment door. Richard's last investment in Dubai. At least, that's what it was supposed to look like. The interior was surprisingly austere for someone of her social standing. No expensive artwork or ostentatious furniture. Just the essentials, organized with military precision. You're not a bored socialite, are you? Marcus asked, observing how she checked the windows with a trained eye. Victoria laughed humorlessly. No, I'm MI6, International Financial Crimes Division. The revelation hung in the air for a moment. Did Richard know? Not at first. Our marriage was... She paused, choosing her words. A happy coincidence for the agency. But then he began to suspect. Dubai changed everything. She walked to a panel in the wall that, when pressed, revealed a built-in safe. From inside, she retrieved a folder. 3 years ago, we identified a large-scale money laundering operation. Billions being moved through phantom real estate projects. Chapman was just the tip of the iceberg. Marcus leafed through the documents. Bank transactions, surveillance photos, coded reports. Why didn't they arrest him? Because he has protection. Someone high up is involved. Richard discovered who. She stopped abruptly, her eyes fixed on the window. Get down! The glass exploded inward as the shots began. Marcus pulled Victoria behind a sofa, his mind automatically registering the precision of her movements. Definitely professional training. Emergency exit? He asked between shots. Fire escape. Through the kitchen, she responded, drawing a gun from an ankle holster. But first, Victoria rolled to the still-open safe, grabbing a laptop. More shots hit the wall above her. What's so important on that computer? The proof Richard died trying to protect. The identity of the traitor inside MI6. They managed to reach the fire escape, descending rapidly while hearing heavy footsteps above. On the street, a car was waiting with the engine running. Rachel at the wheel. Get in, she shouted. Marcus hesitated for a fraction of a second, but another bullet ricocheting off metal decided for him. As soon as they got in, Rachel accelerated. Do you have the file? Rachel asked, skillfully maneuvering through traffic. Yes, Victoria answered, but we need access to a secure terminal to decode it. Marcus looked between the two women. You know each other. Rachel is CIA, Victoria explained. We've been working together for months, trying to expose this operation. And Richard? A heavy silence filled the car. It was Rachel who finally responded. He discovered something he shouldn't have. Something big enough for Chapman to send a professional team after him. The same team that's after us now, Victoria completed, checking her phone. We need to reach the safe location before. The impact came from nowhere. A black SUV hit the side of the car, making it spin. Marcus felt the world rotate, the sound of twisting metal and breaking glass filling his ears. When everything stopped, he saw Victoria unconscious beside him, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. Rachel had disappeared through the broken windshield. He saw figures approaching, and then, before he could react, he felt a sting in his neck. His last vision was of Victoria opening her eyes, a look of absolute determination on her face as she reached for something in her coat. The world went dark to the sound of more gunshots. The first thing Marcus noticed when regaining consciousness was the smell of mold. The second was that he was tied to a chair in a dark, damp environment, probably a basement. His head throbbed where he had been hit. Finally awake, A familiar voice said. Rachel emerged from the shadows, but there was something different about her posture. The concerned otter disguise had completely disappeared. Where's Victoria? Safe. For now. Rachel lit a cigarette, the ember briefly illuminating her face. You know, Marcus, you did exactly what we expected. Every step, every discovery, everything was carefully planned. The memories started coming back like flashes. The envelope with too much money, the anonymous photos, the conveniently found USB drive. Richard's murder was necessary. A new voice interrupted. Thomas Chapman entered the room, his imposing figure blocking the little light coming from the door. He was about to ruin years of careful work. You planted the evidence against Victoria. Chapman smiled. Actually, that part was her idea. Marcus felt his blood freeze. What? She didn't tell you everything, did she? Rachel laughed softly. Victoria isn't just MI6. She's much more flexible in her allegiances. Dubai, Marcus murmured, the pieces fitting together. She was working for you all along. Not exactly, Victoria said, emerging from the shadows. Her face was clean of the blood Marcus had seen before, her posture relaxed. I work for myself. Always have. She approached Marcus, her heels echoing on the concrete. Richard discovered a secret operation, Project Quintessence. It wasn't just money laundering. It was a scheme to infiltrate double agents into key positions in the British government. And you're one of those agents. I am. The agent, she corrected. Years building an impeccable reputation in MI6, marriage to an influential businessman, right connections, all leading to a specific promotion happening next week. Counterintelligence Directorate. Chapman completed. Imagine our person overseeing all investigations into double agents. Marcus discreetly tested his restraints. So why involve me? Victoria knelt in front of him, her blue eyes meeting his. Because I needed an impeccable alibi. A respected private investigator, ex-Scotland Yard, investigating my husband and discovering a conspiracy that would completely exonerate me. Your reputation for integrity makes your testimony unquestionable. And if I refuse to cooperate, you won't, Rachel said, throwing some photos in front of him. They were images of Sarah, his secretary, in her daily activities. Not if you want her to remain safe. Marcus felt a wave of fury. If you touch her, that depends entirely on you, Victoria interrupted softly. All you need to do is confirm my version of events. How Richard was involved with Chapman, how he planned to frame me, how he discovered the truth too late. And Rachel? What's her role in all this? Insurance, Victoria smiled. If something goes wrong, the CIA becomes the perfect scapegoat. International tensions. You know how it is. Chapman checked his watch. The car is waiting. We need to prepare everything for tomorrow. Victoria stood up, but stopped when she heard Marcus's voice. You made a mistake. And what would that be? You underestimated how much Richard really loved you. For a moment, just a moment, Marcus saw something pass across Victoria's face. Pain? Regret? But soon her mask of coldness returned. Love is for amateurs, Marcus. Power is for professionals. As they left, leaving him alone in the darkness, Marcus smiled slightly. They hadn't noticed that during the entire conversation, he was wearing the wire that Sarah always insisted he carry. The entire conversation had been recorded. Now, he just needed to escape, and he had learned a thing or two about that at Scotland Yard. The rain had turned into a storm when Marcus finally managed to free himself. Years working kidnapping cases at Scotland Yard had taught him some useful tricks. His captors had taken his phone, but they hadn't found the small tracker sewn into the hem of his coat, another gift from Sarah. He was in an old warehouse near the canal. Through the dirty windows, he could see the city lights reflected in the dark water. Checking his watch, he realized he had less than 2 hours until Victoria's inauguration ceremony. His first call was to Jack. I need you to access the Riverside Gardens cameras, he whispered, moving silently through the warehouse. Look for any footage of Richard Henderson on the night he died. Marcus, this is illegal? Yes. Necessary? Absolutely. While waiting, he made his second call to Ian Foster. You were right, Foster said as soon as he answered. I just got the ballistics results. The gun that killed Henderson wasn't the same one that left residue on Victoria's hands. It was all planted. I need you to gather a team, Marcus instructed. And Ian, trust only people you've known for more than 10 years. His phone vibrated. A message from Jack with a link. The video showed Richard Henderson entering his office on the night of his death. Minutes later, Victoria entered. But the most interesting part was what happened next. Rachel leaving hurriedly, carrying a folder, followed by Chapman. We have one more thing, Foster added. That word you mentioned, quintessence. It's the name of an old MI6 operation. Something about infiltration into foreign governments. It was abandoned years ago for being considered too radical. It wasn't abandoned, Marcus corrected. It was privatized. A noise caught his attention. Voices approaching. Marcus hid behind some boxes as two men passed by, carrying equipment. Ceremony starts at 9, one of them was saying. Everything has to be ready before. Marcus waited for them to move away before heading in the opposite direction. He found what he was looking for in a back room, his phone and the recording he'd made. But there was more, an open laptop showing emails between Victoria and Chapman. The true extent of Project Quintessence was even bigger than he had imagined. At 8:45, the inauguration ceremony was about to begin in the imposing MI6 building. Victoria, stunning in a navy blue suit, was preparing for her moment of triumph. That's when the first signs that something was wrong began to appear. First, Rachel didn't respond to her messages. Then, Chapman didn't show up for the ceremony. And then, a moment of your attention. Marcus's voice echoed through the sound system. The screens around the auditorium flickered, showing the Riverside Gardens video. Victoria maintained her composure, but her eyes frantically searched for exits. Too late. MI5 agents were already blocking all the doors. You know what your mistake was? Marcus asked, emerging from backstage. It wasn't underestimating Richard's love. It was underestimating your guilt. He played a recording. The real conversation between Victoria and Richard on the night of the murder. I can't continue with this, Richard's voice said. It's going too far. It's too late to turn back, Victoria responded. Then I'll expose everything. I've already sent the proof. The sound of the gunshot was deafening even in the recording. Chapman and Rachel are already in custody, Foster announced, entering the auditorium. We found the server with all the Project Quintessence files. It's over. Victoria looked at Marcus, a sad smile playing on her lips. You really think it's over? There are much more powerful people involved in this. People who... The sound of the shot caught everyone by surprise. Victoria staggered, a red stain spreading across her impeccable suit. In the building across the street, a sniper calmly dismantled his equipment. Marcus ran to her, catching her before she fell. You were right, she whispered, her voice failing. About Richard, about the guilt. I really did love him, you know. In the beginning it was real. Why? Marcus asked, feeling her life slipping away. Because sometimes power isn't enough. Those were her last words. Days later, Marcus was in his office, organizing the final case reports. Project Quintessence had been exposed, but as Victoria predicted, many of those involved remained in the shadows. Chapman and Rachel would face justice, but the true extent of the conspiracy remained a mystery. Sarah placed a cup of coffee on his desk. Do you think it's over? Marcus looked out the window, watching the rain that was still falling over Manchester. Somewhere in the city, a sniper was storing his rifle, awaiting new orders. In some elegant office, someone was planning the next move. No, He finally answered. It just changed shape. In his drawer, Richard Henderson's USB drive still held unrevealed secrets. And somewhere, the wheels of power continued turning, relentless as ever. The only difference was that now Marcus knew, in the City of Shadows, even truth wears masks. If you've made it this far, I know you love a good mystery story as much as I do. Don't miss our next narratives. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like if you were also surprised by this ending. See you in the next story.